Alright, guys, let's jump into the story for today. There's a place in the far northwest corner of Canada that barely anyone has ever stepped foot in. It's called Nahali Valley. It lies with a massive stretch of wilderness known as the Nahali National Park Reserve. To put this in perspective, this park covers over 11,000 square miles of land. That's larger than Jamaica, bigger than Lebanon, and almost twice the size of Cyprus. And yet, most people, even in Canada, have never heard about it. It's not because it's hidden, it's not some secret military base or fenced off zone, it's just because it's remote. So remote that no highways lead to it, no rail lines run through it, and there are no marked hiking trails. There's also no convenience stores, no gas stations. It's really just empty, nothing. The only way in, however, is by a foot plane, by boat, or by spending days, sometimes weeks, hiking through unpredictable backcountry, often without so much as a footpath to follow. And once you're in, guys, you're really just cut off. There's no cell signal, no rangers on patrol, no emergency outpost. If something happens, if your gear fails, if a storm rolls in, if you make a wrong turn, there's no button to press, no number to call. You're completely alone. And the land itself is staggering. Towering mountains rise like jagged stone walls. Dense, unbroken forests stretch for miles in every direction. Waterfalls tumble in a deep canyon carved over millions of years. Thick fog rolls in and stays sometimes for days. Temperature swings widely, even in the summer months. Storms can roll in out of question, and the rivers, they look peaceful from a distance, but they're icy cold, fast, and filled with rock sharps enough to destroy any type of boats. Despite all of this, it's not illegal to enter. You're allowed to go if you want. There are no guards stopping you, no permits required for most areas, but even still, most people don't. The Native American communities who've lived near this land for generations, they're called the Dean, in particular, have always spoken of it with deep respect. They didn't build settlements into the valley, they didn't hunt there, not because they didn't know how to survive, but because they didn't want to. The stories passed down through generations didn't describe a place to explore, they described a place to avoid. And even in this age of satellite imagery, GPS and global mapping, large portions of the Nahali remained unvisited, not because no one can go there, but because no one does. Despite everything I just told you, the brutal terrain, the unpredictable weather, the silence that seemed to stretch for miles, there were still people who looked at the Nahali Valley and saw opportunity, because along with the stories of dangers, there were also whispers of gold. Not just flakes or scattered dust. People claimed there were entire veins of it hidden deep in the valley, untouched, unclaimed, waiting for the right person to find it. And in 1904, three brothers heard of these whispers, and they decided they were going to be the first ones to find out. In the early 1900s, the dream of striking gold was still very much alive. Across western Canada and Alaska, small towns were popping up overnight as people searched for the next big discovery. It didn't matter how dangerous it was. If there was even the slightest chance of finding gold, someone was going to take it and risk that opportunity. Three brothers, Willie, Frank, and Charlie McLeod, had been hearing the same rumors that everyone else had. There was gold up north, and lots of it, and the rich deposits were rumored to be somewhere along the South Nahali River. Most people ignored those stories. The Nahali was too remote, too dangerous. There were easier places to explore. However, the McLeod brothers weren't interested in easy. They'd worked as prospectors before. They were experienced in the backcountry, and they believed they could reach the mysterious valley first. They could stake a claim, mine it, and return as wealthy men. So in the summer of 1904, they packed up supplies and headed into the wild. No guides, no map, just the bare essentials. tools, food, and a dangerous amount of confidence. They weren't the first to hear about the Nahali gold, but they might have been the first bold or reckless enough to try to find it. In the summer of 1904, the McLeod brothers, Willie, Frank, and Charlie, loaded up a cedar canoe and pushed off from the edge of the Fort Liard, heading straight into the unknown. They didn't bring much, just the basics: a couple of worn gold pans, an old rifle, some axes, canvases for tents, and enough dried meat and biscuits to last them a few weeks. If they stretched it, everything would be okay. All their supplies were jammed into one long, narrow canoe. No backup, no second boat. If something went wrong, that was it. They followed the Liard River for a while, then turned south and entered the South Holly River, and that's when things started to feel different. The South Nahali isn't like most rivers. It doesn't ease you in. It moves fast, hits hard, and sounds like it's alive. Sometimes it's wide and quiet. Other times it's narrow into a white water that turns and throws your canoe sideways without warning you. They had to keep their gear tied down tight, and even then they almost lost it all more than once. There were moments where they had to climb out, soaked and freezing, and drag everything over rocks and brush just to keep moving. The cliffs along the side of the river started getting taller, the trees thicker, and sunlight barely reached over the ground into some places. And at night, it was cold, freezing cold, like really cold. That kind of cold that sinks into your bones even under thick wool blankets. They'd huddle around a fire, passing around a tin mug of boiled river water just to stay warm. And one of them always stayed up a little later, tossing more wood on the flames, listening for animals or anything else that might be moving in the dark. They barely spoke during those nights, not just because they were scared, but because the silence around them felt so complete, so heavy, that even talking felt out of place. Their routine became survival: wake up early, boil water, pack the canoe, push further in. Sometimes they caught fish, sometimes they went bed hungry. That's just how it was. Every few miles, they'd stop and scan the riverbanks, looking for any signs of gold. The gear was heavy, their hands were raw from paddling and digging, and the cold never really went away. But they kept going. Oh, they sure kept going. And then, one morning, the river bent wide and the cliffs opened up. Mist hung low over the water, and the trees looked like they had been standing there untouched for centuries. Everything was just quiet. Still, it felt like they were the first people to ever set foot there. They pulled the canoe ashore and set up a bigger camp, cut logs for shelter, cleared space around for a fire, and marked a nearby tree so they wouldn't lose their bearing. This spot felt right, like it was the place the stories had been pointing to all along. Every day they worked up the riverbank. Every night they came back to the same fire. Same tarp, same cold. Everything was the same. They didn't know how long they'd stay. They didn't know if they'd find anything, but they believed they were close. And for now, that was enough. After weeks in the valley, the McLeod brothers finally decided it was time to head home. They hadn't found any gold, but they were convinced that it was there. Maybe it was the way that the riverbeds shimmered in the early light. Maybe it was the insects. Maybe it was the staggering cliffs. Whatever it was, they were sure of it. This valley had something. But they couldn't stay. Their food was almost gone, the cold was getting worse, and their clothes were damp, more than dry, and the canoe was starting to wear out from all the scraping and dragging across the rocks. They pushed as far as they could go without, well, dying. So they packed up the camp, they tied everything down tight, loaded the canoe, and started the long journey back down the South Nahali River. Going downstream this time. Should have been easier, but it wasn't. The river was just that unpredictable. On the way out, fast moving, narrow twisting through steep canyon walls that had echoed every splash of the water and crack of the wood. They kept their head down, moving quietly. Their hands were blistered, their face wind burned, and they made it back. When they returned to town, they looked rough, skinny, dirty, worn down, but they weren't discouraged. They were energized. They told friends and other prospectors about what they'd seen. Not in detail, just enough to stir up curiosity, enough to hint they might have been the first to stumble on something big, something untouched. They didn't talk about how hard it had been, how, how cold they'd been, about the cold nights or the long stretches of silence, and how quiet it was, about how the place seemed to swallow sound. They just didn't. They were already planning to go back. Only this time, they do it differently. Better gear, more supplies, and more time. The McLeod brothers believed the valley was hiding something, and they were going to be the first ones to find it. Following summer, in 1905, the McLeod brothers prepared for a second trip into the Nahali Valley. But this time, not all three would go. Charlie, the oldest, stayed behind. He said he wanted to handle logistics, help organize supplies, maybe raise, funding if they struck something promising. So Willie and Frank, the two younger brothers, set off with a third man named Robert Wire, a friend and fellow prospector. They brought more gear this time, right? They're coming prepared. They've been there before, they understand the terrain, they know what they need to do to improve. So this time they're bringing more gear, more food, more tools. They're bringing stronger gear, better canvas for shelter for when they camp. So their plan was better this time. They came prepared, but it was more simple as well. They were going to go back to the same spot they've been before, so they have experience navigating that terrain, and they're going to spend as much time as it took to find gold. And if there was no gold in that spot, they were going to go and follow that river north to see if there was any gold. So if there's no gold in that current spot, they're going to keep going down the river to see if there's any more. They left early in the season, left in spring because they wanted to give themselves more time to travel before the weather turned, right? So for the first few weeks after they left, everything was quiet. Charlie's staying back, he's handling logistics, and he received a letter confirming they had reached the valley and set up camp. The letter was brief, mostly about the weather and river conditions, the terrain, and their overall confidence in the area that they're going to find gold and they're going to, make it work. There's no panic in the letter, no problems. Everything was going in the right direction. But then weeks passed, then months, with no letters, no updates, nothing. Charlie wasn't worried at first because we got to remember this is 1905. There's no cell phones, there's no email. Things worked a lot differently back then. So delays were normal, and especially out in the wild. I mean, think about it. They're going into the Nahali area, right? Where even to this day, there's still no signal and no GPS. So imagine over 100 years ago what that would have been like, right? The way that we communicate now, it seems so instant. But back then, things took a lot longer for people to communicate. It was, through letter. So, he wasn't worried. He was more confident. But by the time that fall arrived, and still silence, he was starting to feel like something was wrong. Other prospectors returned from smaller trips around that region, so other people were coming back from the Nahali area, and his brothers still had not reached him. And as the prospectors were coming back, they were telling Charlie that they had not seen his brothers and their friend that they were traveling with. By early winter, Charlie knew something was off. He started asking around quietly at first if anyone could help him launch a search. And then that's when the story takes a turn. So Charlie pulled together a search team, a few locals, a trapper, a guy who had passed through the part of the valley once a year earlier. It wasn't a big group. Most people didn't want to go, you know, that far up north in the winter, let alone the Nahali, right? But Charlie wasn't giving up. That's his brothers. He loves his brothers. He wants to go find his brothers. So they loaded up the canoes and sleds with food and blankets and lanterns and axes and enough gear to survive the trip. Then they pushed off down the same route that the brothers had taken, up the South Nahali and deeper into the wild. Except they're not going during, you know, summer or spring. They're going through that fall to winter time. And this is northwest Canada. So the weather hit hard and fast. Nights dropped well below freezing. The river was louder and faster and clogged with ice in some places. Thick fog clung to the cliffs, and sometimes it was so dense they had to stop and wait for it to clear just to see 10 feet ahead. So, can we imagine this? It's 1905, no cell phones. You can't, ask Google something to help you out. You're stuck in a river, a freezing cold river, trying to find your brothers, all right? And the trees felt taller now. The shadows seemed longer, and the silence, it was just empty. It felt full, like something was there, just out of sight. They pressed on for days, following the river bends and searching every bank, every trail they could find. Eventually, they reached the old campsite from the year before, the place where Willie, Frank, and Charlie had all stayed together during the first expedition. So, can we remember? Let's log back into our memory. The first expedition, right, with the three brothers, they're at the campsite and they're finding it. But this time, it's empty. There was no tracks, no supplies, just broken brush. A few leftover logs and ashes of an old fire pit, now cold and dusted with snow. They debated turning back. Supplies were running low, and the cold was getting worse. Okay? But then, just off the main river, tucked behind a thick wall of spruce trees, they saw it. A faded canvas tent, half collapsed, half buried under a fresh layer of snow. No movement, no sound, and no one in sight. Charlie stepped forward. His heart was racing, and he pulled back the flap. At first, he didn't quite understand what he was looking at. Inside, the space was cramped, the ground was frozen, and hard packed from the snow drifting in. There were old supplies scattered near the back. So imagine it's a rusted tin can, a broken lantern, or torn bedroll. The air, it just smelled stale, cold, like it had been sealed off for months. And then he saw his brothers. He saw their lifeless bodies. One of them was just lying inside the tent, curled on his side like he'd been asleep. The other was outside, just a few feet away, half buried in snow, with one arm stretched, reaching towards a rifle, still leaning against the log. But both were still dressed in their winter gear. But something wasn't right. Charlie called for the others. They cleared the snow slowly and quickly, and what they found shook them to their core. There was no signs of struggle, no firewood chopped, no tracks leading away. It looked like they had been simply stopped, frozen. They searched the area for the third man, Robert Weir, but there was no sign of him, no extra bedding, no fresh graves, nothing. Charlie scanned the site again, hoping that something would make sense, finding anything that would make any explanation for what happened to his brothers. But there was nothing. But then he looked to his side, and there was a tree, and nearby, with a message carved into the bark. Faded, but still visible, it read, "We have found a fine prospect." And that was it. No date, no name, no other clues. The only clue he found was, "We have found a fine prospect." Just three men who had gone into the valley, and the only thing that came out were dead bodies and silence. When Charlie returned from the valley, he immediately reported what they found. Word spread quickly that the death of two prospectors, especially in such a remote and unforgiving place, raised a lot of questions. But there were very few answers. The Royal Northwest Mounted Police, Canada's law enforcement at the time, launched an official investigation. A small team was sent into the valley months later, once conditions allowed for travel again. Because the mountain police, they weren't looking to go into the heart of winter. This is a no-brainer decision. They wanted to save time and manpower, and they wanted to go during a lot easier of a time. By the time they arrived, however, winter had buried most of the site under snow and ice. What they found confirmed what Charlie had already said. Two bodies, just for the cold, laying near a collapsed tent. No sign of struggle, no sign of robbery. Their supplies were still there, and their rifles untouched. What stood out most, though, was what was missing. Both men, Willie and Frank, were missing their heads. That detail alone will go on to define the entire story. But in the moment, investigators tried to stay logical. They said it was likely an animal, harsh conditions, exposure. They wrote it into their reports that the bodies that they'd been scavenged by a predator after death. Wolves or bears, maybe a mountain lion. They're trying to write off the most logical decision. They're trying to see if it's, a wild animal. As for Robert Ware, the assumption was that he'd either wandered off or met the same fate somewhere deeper in the valley, never to be found. The official conclusion was simple, that the men had likely died of starvation or exposure, and nature had done the rest. But most people weren't satisfied. Let's just have this thought process for a second. They find two men with both of their heads chopped off, right? And they're blaming it on wild animals. What wild animal just eats a head? Let's let that sink in. Anyways, the McLeod brothers were experienced outdoorsmen. They knew how to survive in the wild. They prepared for this trip, and the campsite didn't look like a place where men had been slowly dying. It looked like a place frozen in time. Like, just imagine a picture. Like someone just took a picture in 1905, and it's frozen in time. Locals started calling the place where they found something new the Valley of Headless Men. After McLeod brothers, after the McLeod brothers, the valley didn't go quiet. If anything, more people wanted in. Gold fever had the effect. The story about the brothers and what they found, or almost found, spread quickly through the northern territories. People whispered about lost treasures, secret veins, and a valley that had only just been touched. So this story only confirmed the rumors that the area was filled with gold. So all these people were rushing to the area. But the story doesn't end there. And so, year after year, people went in. Trappers, prospectors, adventurers, and some were seasoned woodsmen. Others were just men chasing a dream, just like the three brothers. They have some similarities. Most never met headlines, but some did. So in 1913, 8 years later, right? 1905, right, was the summer of the Headless brothers. But in 1913, 8 years later, a Danish prospector named Martin Dorgsen, has a hard name, headed into the Nahani with plans to stay there through winter. He was well prepared, even by frontier standards. Okay? He brought in a full outfit of supplies, built a log cabin deep in the valley near the Flat River, and even sent letters back to his friends in Dawson and Fort Simpson saying he was doing well. His last note, however, mentioned promising signs along the riverbank, enough to keep him digging through the snow. So he's there in the Headless Valley. 8 years later, he set up a full-on cabin. He's experienced. Okay? Now this is where the story gets interesting. When spring came and no one heard from him, a search party went in. They found the cabin, or really what was left of the cabin. It had burned completely to the ground. Charred logs, collapsed roof, and ashes everywhere. But in the middle of the ruins, they found, I guess we can all assume, they found a body. And it was Martin. He was burned beyond recognition, and his head was missing. No valuables were taken, no signs of break-in, and investigators couldn't explain how the fire had started. There were no signs of an overturned stove, no oil spills, nothing. It looked like it had ignited from the top down. So let's just, step back for a second. In, 1905 to 1913, there's been 3 bodies, 3 weird coincidences where they're frozen in time, where the 2 brothers froze to death with a rifle. His hand was reaching for a rifle, right? The other one was frozen on the ground in a still position like he was asleep, both with their heads missing. Martin, 8 years later, an experienced outdoorsman, built a cabin, and the cabin burnt from the top all the way to the bottom. And, just like the brothers, he was missing his own head. Alright, let's go back into the story. 8 years later, in 1921, another man, John O'Brien, vanished while trying to stake a claim somewhere upriver. His sled was found perfectly intact. His gear had been unpacked and neatly stacked on the riverbank, almost like he had sat down to rest and then vanish. There was no footprints, no drag marks, no blood, just a cold trail. So again, coincidence, maybe, or maybe not. Another man went missing in the same valley, and again, it was 8 years later. Then came Phil Powers in 1931. Again, another experienced outdoorsman. He built a cabin further up into the valley than most dared to go. People often respected him, thought of him as smart and resourceful and an experienced outdoorsman, and not the kind of person who took unnecessary risks. So people admired him and they would try to emulate him, and they thought of him as a respected outdoorsman, someone that wouldn't make mistakes. When people stopped hearing from him, shocker, searchers went in and found his cabin burnt to ashes. So 2 cabins, both burnt to ashes. Howard's body was inside, curled near the door, just like Martin's before him. His fire hadn't started from the stove, it had started above the roofline, like something had ignited it from above. By this point, rumors were no longer just whispers. People started calling it cursed. Others believed there was something in the valley watching, waiting. The name of the valley, Valley of the Headless Men, had stuck, and it was being passed along with every new disappearance. Then came the death of Ernest Savard in 1945. He wasn't just another explorer. He was a businessman from Fort Liard, and he had gone into the valley with a clear plan. When his body was found on the riverbank, it was lying face down. His pack was still strapped to him, his rifle hadn't been fired, and his gold pans were nearby. And once again, his head was missing. That made at least 4 deaths where the exact same pattern showed up. No signs of struggle, no theft, no injuries from animals, just a calm, quiet scene and a body without a head. Each time the official explanation stayed the same. Harsh wilderness, accidents, wild animals, wolves, bears, exposure, cougars, you name it, they listed it. But people weren't buying it anymore. So remember, this story started in 1905 and all the way to 1945. So it's been going on for 40 years. 40 years of people missing their heads and showing up with rare occurrences and things that people cannot explain. This has been going on for 40 years in the same exact valley. The Nahanni had taken one new representation, something beyond danger. It wasn't just the people died there, it's how they died. The deeper you went, the quieter things became, and eventually even the most experienced travelers started turning back before reaching the heart of the valley. Because by now, they knew what it was called, and they knew what it meant. You can come in now. Valley of Headless Men. The local Dani people speak of it in hushed voices. Bush pilots still to this day fly around it when they can. And old-timers, those who have lived near it all their lives, still avoid talking about it or being seen near it. The Dani people, whose oral history stretches back thousands of years, always believed the Nahanni was more than just land. To them, it was alive, a place of power, a place where spirits walked and rules bent. They warned of a being that would climb cliffs. A monster, guys, that would climb cliffs. Pale skin, thin, and skinless. Just a red muscle stretched over a bone, moving in silence, crawling over sheer rocks like it was a flat ground. Its eyes, they said, glowed white like fireflies in the mist. You wouldn't hear it coming, you wouldn't see it from far away, but it would see you, and if it found you, it wouldn't just take your life, it would erase your presence. That's why in the Dani stories there were no bones, no remains, and no heads. No heads? Just emptiness. Remember, those brothers. Both were found. One reaching for his rifle, head gone. One laying in the snow, head gone. The experienced outdoorsman, the Danishman Martin, his head was gone. 4 heads were gone in 40 years. Nothing was found. As the years passed, those tales stayed buried in the north. But after the death of Powers and Martin and Savard, the legend leaked out into newspapers and then across the world. In 1947, a short article ran in the New York Times describing a series of unexplained deaths in a remote Canadian valley where gold prospectors had vanished and bodies had been recovered in an unusual condition. That piece didn't go into detail, but it hinted at something that the Royal Canadian Mounted Police couldn't explain. By the 1950s, readers from Toronto to New York were hearing whispers of a place with no law, no roads, and no answers. The kind of place where you could go in and the world might just forget that you ever existed. Writers and adventurers started calling the Nahanni Canada's lost world. For those who live near it, the name misses the point. It's not lost, it's just watching. And ever so often, it takes something. So, what exactly happened in the Nahanni Valley, or more famously known as the Headless Valley? Did the McLeod brothers fall victim to the harsh environments, cold, isolation, and wild animals? Was it a bear? Was it a wolf? Was it a cougar? Or was it just a series of tragic accidents in one of the most dangerous and remote places on Earth? Or possibly, is there something else out there? Something older than the maps, older than the river, older than the cliffs. Something that's always been watching, observing, in the dark, waiting to strike. The Donnies say that there are places where people don't belong, where the land keeps secrets and the time works differently. They've been saying that for centuries, long before anyone from the outside came poking around. But we didn't listen. We built cabins. We carved names into trees. We tried to claim the land as our own. And one by one, people started getting picked off and disappearing, heads being removed, and unexplained occurrences. No one ever saw what they took, but the pattern was always the same. No sign of struggle, no gear missing, no good explanation, just silence. And every now and then, a body, missing its head. Even now, the valley is still out there, quiet, untouched. Whole sections remain uncharted, not because they're impossible to reach, but because no one wants to. Because, deep down, we know some places were never meant to be explored, some stories were never meant to be solved, and some valleys were never meant to let anyone out. Hope you guys really enjoyed that story. It was I know it was a little like a longer one, and it took more time to evolve, but I think this one really is a chilling one. I'm not sure what happened. Me personally, I think it's because the natives were upset and they see all these people, running to their land, and people are destroying it, searching for gold, trying to take things from the land that's not theirs. And they, took out the revenge because they don't want their supplies and their gold and whatever. They're not interested in that. And how both cabins burnt from the top to the bottom, that could be an arrow with a flame on it, maybe, like an arrow on fire catching their log cabins. But still, that explanation's, dodgy at best. No one really knows what happened. That's the cool part of this story. It's one of my favorite stories that I really like. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and if you guys would like, it would mean the world to me. I'm a small YouTuber, and to leave a comment, to leave a like, and subscribe. And I hope you guys have a chilling night.